I think this is it for Starfield. This update that dropped today, it really feels like the end of the line. That's kind of why I wanted to sit down and go through it. If you've never played it or even heard about it, Starfield was basically supposed to be Skyrim in space, but they probably put it through an AI filter or something because it was just as vanilla and sterile as an HR meeting or something. So let's go over what actually released today, then step back and see where all of this leaves it. Today's update is doing a few big things all at once. The obvious one is the PlayStation 5 release. That alone is a pretty big moment for the game. There's going to be a lot of people jumping in for the first time, seeing all of this without any of the baggage from launch. All the extra bugs and glitches I'm assuming have been worked out for release. Alongside that, there are two additions. There's a free update, Free Lanes, and then there's a paid DLC, Terran Armada, sitting at around $10. And right away, you can tell how they want this to land. The DLC isn't being pushed to something massive, more of a smaller story-focused edition. Something you drop into, play through, get some content out of, and that's basically it. That essentially sets the tone for everything else in this update. A little more than the bare minimum to differentiate the quote-unquote new PS5 release. So going into this, that's really my mindset. What's here, what works, and how much it actually adds to the experience. Well, at least it seems like they learned a bit from the last time they tried this. Their last DLC was Shattered Space, and it came in labeled as an expansion. For a lot of people, that didn't really line up with what they got. The core story was pretty short, and even if you took your time with it, you could see everything it had to offer without putting in a huge amount of hours. So this time around, they've kind of adjusted how they're presenting it. Terran Armada isn't being sold as something necessarily huge. It's a lot closer to a contained piece of content. A storyline with some new encounters and a new faction to deal with. Even though you know what you're getting into, it just feels like they aren't really trying anymore. Well, a lot of people are testing it to see how it plays and whether it actually gives the game something it was missing. I think it just hammers in the same fluff from before, with no real substance. The rollout today was actually a bit shaky. For a while, the DLC just wasn't showing up properly. Lots of people booted it up and couldn't even find it. Some could not even activate it. It wasn't an isolated thing either. Plenty of people were running into it at the same time. So instead of jumping straight in, there was this sort of delay where people were stuck trying to get access. You know, restarting, checking again, waiting it out. It was basically Overwatch 2 all over again. Except this isn't a massively popular multiplayer game. Either way, it eventually fixed itself and everything unlocked like it should, but that first impression couldn't have been great. And so, after all the updates, after the DLC, after the time it's had to settle, where does it actually land? Really, that's what I'm interested in here. Just looking at the game as it is now and whether any of this changes how it comes across when you sit down and play it. Now, the biggest update feature is cruise mode. It changes how movement works inside the system. Before this update, traveling between planets meant opening the map, selecting a destination, and then just jumping. That loop defined space travel, but with free lanes you can stay in control of the ship and move between planets directly. You activate cruise and the ship ramps through different speed tiers, covering distance in real time instead of just cutting away. Bethesda built actual space lanes between planets, and those routes now have things in them, like wreckage, anomalies, random encounters that can pull you out of travel. Those encounters don't hard cut either. As you approach, the game shifts into them with a brief blur instead of a full loading screen. It's still loading something in the background. You can feel it. It's just hidden better than before. While all of that is happening, you're not locked into the pilot seat either. You can basically do everything you could normally do while docked, walk around, use workbenches, talk to companions, even decorate your ship, while the ship is still moving towards its destination. There's also an autopilot layer on top of that. You can lock onto a target, let the ship handle the approach, and it'll slow itself down when you get close instead of overshooting. All of that makes space feel more continuous than it did at launch. You're spending less time in menus and more time sitting in the world while things happen around you. The limit shows up the moment you actually try to land. That transition is still handled the same way. Cruise mode fills the gap between planets, but it doesn't remove the brakes entirely. And that's kind of where things land overall. There are improvements around the edges, but certain core pieces haven't moved at all. You can feel where the limits are, and they show up in the same places they always did. For some people, that's not going to matter much. For others, it's the kind of thing that keeps pulling you out of it. Either way, it's still part of the experience. Then moving on to the Terran Armada DLC, it starts with a broadcast that pulls you into a new faction operating across the settled systems. They position themselves as the true inheritors of Earth, and that idea carries through everything tied to them. Basically, there are some humans and a lot of combat robots. So you'll run into multiple variants, some deployed in waves during fights, others tied to specific encounters, and one of them, named Delta, can actually join you as a companion. There's also a new incursion system where parts of space get locked down by the Armada. When that happens, fast travel gets disabled and you're forced to physically fly into the area using cruise mode, then clear it out. Enemy design is a bit more going on than before, so higher tier Armada units come with modifiers. Things like damage resistance, healing nearby allies, triggering aggression in other enemies, or stacking extra shielding. You can actually see these traits when scanning them before a fight. They also introduce new weapon types on the enemy side, including things like multi-gun platforms, which function more like mounted or heavy support weapons rather than standard rifles. On our side, the player side, the additions are a bit more subtle. There are new ballistic style weapons inspired by some modern guns. Plus, the X-Tech system is tied into the update, which lets you push gear into higher tiers and reroll legendary effects. There are also a few new locations tied to this, like the Anchor Point Star Station, and a few other areas that kind of got siphoned out of the achievements, including places like New Babylon, which haven't really been fully shown yet. And that's really the shape of it. New factions, some robots, some new combat encounters, a system that pushes you into space battles. Instead of skipping them, it expands the game outward, but stays within the same basic structure, really. Coming into this, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Bethesda's older stuff. You know, those earlier games had a certain feel to them. You could just wander, pick a direction, and something would pull you in without you even thinking about it. That sense of getting lost in the world carried a lot of the experience. Over the years, that's really changed. There's been a noticeable change in how they approach their games, what they tend to prioritize, how they build things out. And Starfield sits right in the middle of that change. You can see the ideas they're going for, but you can also feel where things don't quite line up the way they're supposed to, or even the way they used to, which leads us to the monetization side of all of this. And it's hard to ignore once you spend enough time with the game. Paid mods have become part of the overall structure. Not just an extra feature sitting off to the side somewhere, something that's been shoehorned into how content is expected to grow over time. You've got people putting out gear, systems, lots of new additions, and most of them can be quite solid, and it sits right alongside official content. The part that stands out is how much of that space is left open. When you're playing, you start noticing gaps where things could go further, where systems should be expanded, where variety should have been pushed a lot more. Instead of those being filled directly, they tend to live in that mod space. So the experience ends up feeling split. There's a base game and its updates, and then there's everything else around it. If you engage with that side of things, there's more to dig into, but if you don't, you feel the limits a bit more. I mean, it doesn't really stop you from playing, but it does shape how complete the whole thing feels when you look at it as a whole package. And you know, when you spend more time with the game, the overall structure starts to show itself a bit more clearly. You know, the scale has always been massive, no question at all. There's a lot of ground to cover, a lot of places to go, but the way those places are built doesn't always hold up over long sessions. You start to see a lot of familiar patterns, a lot of the same layouts, moving through areas that feel like variations of something you've already done before. The sense of discovery really fades once all of that kicks in. A lot of the environments don't leave a strong impression at all. You move through them, complete what's there, maybe take a quick look, and then move on without much sticking with you afterward. The game keeps giving you more locations, but the impact of each one gets lighter and lighter over time. And I mean, the tech behind it all has its own presence too. You feel it in the way areas are separated, and how interactions play out, and the small pauses and transitions that never fully disappear. Everything feels so stilted. And none of this is subtle once you've been in the game for a while. It becomes part of how you experience absolutely everything else. After all the updates and everything that came with them, Starfield feels more stable, more complete in certain areas, and much easier to spend time in than it was early on. The new additions definitely help. Cruise mode tends to smooth things out. The DLC gives players something new to engage with. There's more here now than there used to be. At the same time, it's the same Starfield really. So where it lands really depends on how you connect with that core experience. Some players will keep putting hours into it without a second thought, while others will reach a point where it stops holding their attention. From here, it looks like support continues in smaller ways. Content drops, a few updates here and there, things to keep the existing player base engaged, and beyond that, their attention will shift forward. And I'm gonna be straight with you, I'm not really happy with this update. For how long this has been in the works, my expectations were higher. There's been a lot floating around, with leaks, data, all of it, pointing towards something bigger for Starfield, something that actually pushed things forward in a real way. And after almost 2 years of waiting, this just isn't it. I mean, there's a lot of smaller additions, a bit of extra content, a few improvements here and there, nothing that really shifts how the game is played. Nothing that really changes the conversation around it or gives it any sort of real momentum. And that's the issue. It's just more of the same vanilla-ass story. But I want to hear from you. Were you expecting more from this update, or is this enough for you? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Once again, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Space pulls you deeper, deeper into belief, deeper into conflict that reshapes systems. Now an armada of steel tightens its grip.